Hey everyone, and welcome to today's live stream. I am creating today's video in response to a question that one of my goat birthing students had. And because she was having some challenges with a couple of her kids gaining weight, and she said, asked if you should bottle raise all of your kids to be sure they get enough milk, because she feels very tempted to do that at this point, because it's stressful when kids are not gaining weight the way that they should be. So I had actually created a part one of this on YouTube when I was on the road on the New York Tollway last like a week and a half ago, and it got cut off halfway. So the first half of that, I do talk a little bit more about the problems that you can have when your kids do not gain enough weight. And I've got other videos on that. And that is, basically chronic coccidiosis is like one of the big ones if kids don't gain enough weight. So that's why it's super important that your kids gain enough weight. It's not just about growing, because if they're growing too slowly, they're going to have a really weak immune system. So this is in response to the second half of her question, which is whether it's safer to just bottle feed all your kids. And my short answer to that is no. There are multiple reasons why I like to dam raise my kids. And it's not just because we're lazy and we want to let the moms do it. It's actually because I believe it's the healthiest way for the kids to be raised. And ultimately, it means the does are going to make more milk. So this was something that we were noticing ourselves early on. We've been raising goats since 2002. And back when we were much busier, we would have like 20 does a year freshening. Now we only have like 7 or 8 most years because my kids are all grown and gone. But we were noticing that does seem to produce more milk if they were raising kids than if they were not raising kids. And then around the time that I was writing my first edition of Raising Goats Naturally, like right after that came out, I saw a study out of Europe that showed that when does were nursing kids, they released oxytocin. Whereas if you milk your goat, she does not release oxytocin. Now, if you're really smart about all your hormones, you're going to be like, oh, but oxytocin doesn't make goats produce. It is responsible for the milk ejection reflex, which is absolutely correct. But what happens if you don't get all the milk out of the udder? It's going to produce less milk. So it does ultimately make a difference in your milk production. And we noticed that basically like, and so many people will say this, like, oh, I'm trying to milk my goat and she's holding back, because you can tell there's still milk in the udder. She's not doing that on purpose. She can't sit there and go, I'm going to hold back my milk for my baby. It's because she doesn't love you as much as she loves her baby. And when her baby nurses, she releases oxytocin, and that makes the milk flow more. So when the kids nurse, that encourages the doe to release oxytocin, which causes them to release more of their milk. And supply and demand, if the milk's not coming out of the udder, the goat's not going to make more to replace it. So ultimately, the oxytocin does have some effect on production, even though it's an indirect effect. The other thing that we noticed is that even to try and come even close to what a goat would produce while nursing kids is that we would have to milk her 3 times a day. And we're not really unique in that. Like, that's what they do. Like the really big dairies, that's what the really big dairies do now, is that instead of milking twice a day, they milk 3 times a day. They milk every 8 hours around the clock because they have employees who can come in and take care of that for them. And so we found that if we had a goat that for whatever reason did not have kids to nurse, that we needed to milk her 3 times a day to get her to even come close to producing what she would have produced when she was actually nursing kids. So it's going to be more work for you to try and get the same amount of milk. So so I know it's tempting. It's like, oh, but if I'm giving the baby a bottle, I know exactly how much they're getting. I know they're getting enough. So what can you do instead of giving a bottle to make sure that your kids are getting enough? And number one is weigh your kids daily for the first 2 weeks. I've not met anybody who does this unless they already follow me. If you follow me already and you watch my other videos, I harp on this all the time, is weigh your kids every day for the first 2 weeks. Like everybody else out there in the world, I was like, the first 10 years or so, I was like, oh, feel their little tummies. It should feel like a little golf ball behind their ribs. And that is so woefully inadequate. All that means is that they nursed recently. That's it. It doesn't mean they got enough. It doesn't mean they're going to thrive and be healthy. And in fact, in the early years before we were doing that, there were lots of kids who had those little golf balls behind their bellies that were slow gainers. So that is really, really inadequate. The scale will tell you you have a problem long before your eyeballs will. One of the biggest examples I have of this is we had, and this actually wasn't in goats. We started doing this with our goats like over 10 years ago. We only started doing it with our sheep 5 or 6 years ago because our sheep had always lambed on pasture before. But we had a lamb. It was a single lamb. Now everybody will like, oh, well, a mom can feed a single, no problem, right? Well, my husband came in the morning and said, hey, that single lamb hasn't gained any weight over, since it was born yesterday. And my first response was, go milk the doe, like feel her udder, see what's wrong. And it turned out she had a raging case of mastitis. She had the bloodiest milk I had ever seen and very little of it. So that lamb would have died if we had not been weighing. And so that's the most extreme example I have. But this also, weighing the kids daily is also what taught us that a first freshening yearling does not usually have the energy to produce enough milk for more than 2 kids. The key here is first freshening yearling, because you have a huge ask. Okay. A yearling is still growing. And so you're asking her to keep putting meat on her own bones, keep growing her own bones, grow babies, feed babies, and fight parasites and have a strong immune system. And usually first freshening yearlings are going to have a challenge with that, especially if they're trying to feed more than 2 kids. If they try to feed 3, you're probably going to have 1 or more that's not going to gain enough weight. And she's probably going to have a problem with worms. Contrary to popular belief, every doe should not have a problem with worms after kidding. I've got other videos on this. I've got podcasts on this with vet professors and researchers. So if you haven't seen those, ask about them in the chat. We'll give you the link. So it's really important that you not ask a goat to produce more milk than she can, because she probably can't do it. And if she tries, it's not going to end well for her or the kids. Someone contacted me a few years ago that had a 10-month-old that gave birth, and she actually worked for someone, and the employer did not want the baby's bottle fed. This baby bottle fed, and the baby was not gaining weight. And it's like, okay, this baby's going to die. Like, they can't just not gain weight. So you're going to have to at least supplement, which is a challenge. Usually once a baby's nursed on mom, it doesn't want to take a bottle. But they were determined. And so they got the baby to take a bottle. And so even though they were supplementing this kid and giving it a bottle, this doe's weight completely stalled. She was 35 pounds when the kid was born. She actually lost weight and just stalled right there. Obviously, a 35-pound goat should not even be giving birth. They should not even be bred until they're 40 pounds. But they had bought this goat that was pregnant. They didn't know it. And so, they walked out one day and this 10-month-old doe had a baby. So they had to deal with what they were presented with. And even with supplementing the kid, still her body trying to produce milk for the kid's demand caused her weight to completely stall. She did not gain any weight for 2 or 3 months before she started to gain weight again. So anyway, that is really important. The other thing is that we do not let any doe try to raise more than 3 kids herself. I know you are going to see people all over the place. They're going to say, oh, my doe raised quads. And I want to know, how much did each one of those kids weigh when it was 2 months old? How much did they weigh going up to that point? Most goats are going to have enough colostrum. Like, most goats are born with this gorgeous big udder. So they've got plenty of colostrum when they're born. They got enough colostrum for 5, 6 kids, no problem, because that udder is full. But as those kids nurse out that colostrum, that is gonna be replaced by mature milk, and that's gonna dilute the colostrum. And at this point now, you're talking about the doe having to produce enough to feed the kids as they demand it. And the biggest challenge with that is that if kids are getting enough milk, within the first 2 weeks, they are going to double their weight. That is for Nigerian dwarfs. So your bigger goats don't gain quite as fast, but healthy Nigerian dwarfs easily double their weight within the first 2 weeks. And this is even if they weigh 8 or 10, I'm sorry, they will weigh 8 or 10 pounds by 2 weeks of age. This is even kids that are born at 4 or 5 pounds will still double their weight by 2 weeks of age. If they're born like at 2 pounds, they might do even better than doubling by 2 weeks of age. So, like we have had 8 sets of quintuplets. And this is where I learned from the School of Hard Knocks that you just do not let does try to raise more than 3. In the very early years, our first set of quads, we almost lost one of them when she was 2 weeks old, because back in that day, it was on the Yahoo groups, and I went to the Yahoo groups and said, my goat just had quads. Can she feed all of them? Multiple people are like, oh yeah, my doe fed quads. And at 2 weeks, this kid almost died. And she was so close to death, I had to tube feed her, which was pretty horrifying for me in my second year of goat ownership. And so anyway, when they don't get enough milk, then they are going to start to fall behind. And last week, somebody had contacted me with kids that were still surviving, but not thriving. They were 2 months old, 10 pounds, and had chronic coccidiosis. And this is kind of par for the course. Like all summer, I am going to be getting messages and emails from people saying that they have got a kid that is 10 to 15 pounds, is 2 months old, 3 months old, that has chronic coccidiosis. So just because a kid survives does not mean that it is thriving. And the reason that we don't even let them try, because first of all, like with a Nigerian dwarf, which is usually what you have, that's usually where you see these problems, because they're the ones who will have the quads and the quints and more sometimes. We've had 1 set of 6, 8 sets of 5, and I don't even know how many quads we've had, because we've got all of these genetics in our herd that the goats produce a lot of multiples. So anyway, they cannot, you're asking, so first of all, when you are bottle feeding a Nigerian dwarf kid, you're going to max out at 1 quart a day. So what is 4 times 1 quart? That's a gallon. Who has a Nigerian dwarf that can produce a gallon a day? Not very many people. So I'm not going to sit here and have any illusions about like, oh yeah, my goat can produce a gallon a day. If they're not producing a gallon a day, then there's no way that each kid can get 1 quart a day. The other thing is, even if you were one of the less than 1% who had a goat that could produce that much, the kids are not going to play nice. We've all seen it. There's always a bully in the group who's going to push the smaller ones away. And then the smaller ones just keep staying small while the big bully just gets bigger and bigger. One person who said to me, oh, my goat's raising 4. She's doing it. I said, what do they weigh? She had no idea. They were 2 months old. Their weights varied from 14 to 24 pounds. So there's no way that 14 pounder would be healthy at 2 months of age. And she wasn't. She'd already been treated for coccidiosis a couple of times. And that's why, because she was malnourished. So you do not see skinny kids because they're growing. So you only get skinny when you lose muscle mass. So you have to lose weight to become skinny. When kids are growing and they don't get enough, they just don't grow as fast. I love the fact that the American Consortium for Small Ruminant Parasite Control just put out their latest information. Instead of looking at body condition on kids, you need to look at average daily weight gain. I love that. That is what I have been promoting for like 10 years now. And so, because people are like, oh, but the kid's not skinny. No, kids don't get skinny. because you have to lose weight to get skinny. If you don't get enough milk as a kid, you just don't gain weight as fast. So checking here real quick. I don't see any comments. If you are watching this later and you have comments, please feel free to post in the comment section below and we'll get back to you. I hope this has been helpful. Bye for now.